Welcome back to Project Synapse, our group of AI-obsessed IT guys who get together every week and talk about issues in AI and how it will roll out in the real world. Today we got on the topic of AI-generated code, in particular what's been called vibe coding, which we've all been playing with, but as always, for those who are fans of the show, Marcel has done a deep dive into. I'm going to do the intro for Project Synapse right now. You probably know the drill by now, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But if you're new to this, just hang on for a few minutes. You'll figure it out. We've got Marcel Gagné. I'm going to make this distinction on your introduction this week because I think it's important. Really a former system administrator before you became an author and a famous man of the world. And welcome, Marcel.
Okay, I'm scared now, but thank you. Good morning.
And John Pinard, who is another, we're going to call you a seasoned veteran, somebody who's been in IT for a long time and is now an executive with the company, but has done, like me, probably every job, including the most important one, which is going for pizza.
Pretty much.
Yeah. That's the thing. You really know you've become an executive when you go get the food because everybody else is doing something useful.
Doing the work.
Yeah.
Is seasoned just a way of saying old, Jim?
I prefer seasoned.
Oh, there you go.
See, and they can be seasoned and yet young and fresh.
Fresh and spicy.
How am I doing so far?
Give it a rest, Marcel. We're old, okay? We confess. And I've been doing this for 40 years. And I literally, my bio says I've done everything from working in the mailroom, which is where I started in IT, playing guitar with a couple of the guys in the computer room. They said, you could figure this stuff out. And that was my auspicious start in IT. It was the fact that I couldn't make enough money in music to pay the bills, but eventually ended up running a worldwide consulting practice in IT and working for a few companies. So we've all done a bit. And the reason why I point this out is because Marcel insisted we talk about vibe programming. He said,
vibe coding.
Oh, sorry, vibe coding. I'm sorry, I got to get with the vibe. And he did that Marcel thing of you never do anything that I want to do. And so we have to do this program now. But as I dug into it more and started to think about it, it became an interesting thing to talk about. We have this new situation where people have amazing tools to allow them to create. So let's talk about vibe coding. But I want to do a little bit of a history thing first, and then we'll get into it, because the pursuit of being able to write code without having to write code has been around ever since I started in IT. When, believe it or not, there were people who programmed in mysterious languages which were close to the computer itself, bits and bytes, hexadecimal, Fortran, languages that were almost like you really moved every bit and byte around yourself. And assembler. Yeah. Magical geniuses who could do this stuff, more math and science than humanity some days, but they could do this. And along came the common business-oriented language, COBOL, which was one of the first things that was created. And why it was created was to use more or less human language syntax, create a language that we could talk to computers with. And it has, like any programming construct, it has very few grammatical points in it. It can do, it's a very limited language. You can learn the syntax of COBOL in a day or two at most. And you can know probably almost every command. You might not know exactly how to exercise them or how they all work, but you can learn the vocabulary of programming, and which makes it deceptive. Because and I'll give you a perfect example. Once you can write a program, you can go do this and this, if this, not that, and you put together your own cute little program. Pretty soon, I'm a programmer. And anybody who's...
However, if you're doing that in COBOL, you're going to need 150 lines of code because you have to have your declaration section and your program.
Exactly.
Like everything. And God help you if there's a period missing at one of the...
Exactly. So here's the inexperienced guy teaching himself COBOL in his spare time because I wanted to learn it. And then I went to they got this whole thing that's a whole preface to this, which you have to tell the COBOL program everything about the machine you're in, the environment you're in. It's called the environment division in the programs, like different divisions. And I was trying to work this out and go, where will I find all this information, put all this into there? Asked one of the senior programmers on our team, because I was an analyst at the time. I wasn't really much of a programmer. And he said, you copy it in from another program, stupid. And that's where I got my first experience with vibe coding. Copy in something somebody else had done, and it was really easy. And I say that the principle, because now we went through, and we did this for years and years of 4GL languages. I can talk in English to the computer. We created all of these things that will create COBOL generators. Case tools. You do the processes, it'll turn into a system. We've been following this snake oil show for 30 years, and we always end up with the same problem. We get a lot of early results, but we hit the limitations of. That's the framework I wanted to create, and that's not that there weren't successes. With each one of these developments, there have been successes, but you have to understand them, know how to work them, and to quote Clint Eastwood, you got to know your own limitations. And that's
or Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold, know when to fold, know when to walk away, and know when to run.
And know when to run, yeah. And anybody who's been on a losing project and has got their resume out in the street because this one's going down the toilet knows when to run. There's those things as well. And if they run without documenting what they did, yeah. No, yes, I think we've learned everything we can learn from bad old Westerns and country and Western music. There you go.
Okay, for what it's worth, I'm a rock guy, but my dad was still is a country and Western guy, and I listened to an awful lot of country growing up, despite my protestations. Just for the record, by the way, the COBOL thing, the copying code wasn't vibe coding. That was more like art. Okay, because remember what Pablo Picasso once said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And that's what a great programmer was. They knew when to grab the code from somebody else's working programs to create art.
I always thought that's what made you a senior programmer, was knowing where to borrow code from.
Watch for me doing this. The Picasso thing, watch for me doing that. I can't remember the reason.
It's called the gun in the first act. You've got the gun in the first act, and you know it's going to be used.
We're going to come back to this Picasso thing, because I think you've hit the nail on the head, but I'm going to keep everybody, including you, in suspense.
Okay, then. I'm a little bit terrified, but let's continue.
Yeah. I like a show that starts out with Marcel being terrified because he's not afraid of anything. He'll dive into anything. Yeah.
Things are looking up.
Yeah. So let's start out, Marcel. You've been playing with this more than anybody. So why don't you do the programming for dummies piece for the two of us? You're a senior guy and you're coming in to show these two loser executives who know nothing anymore. So that's what I always assume my younger staff could look at me going, how did he get there and be so stupid? So programming for dummies, you walk us through what you've discovered from the world of vibe.
Okay, first of all, the term, I just want to lean on the term vibe coding because it was the first person who used it, and it went viral after that was a guy named Andrej Karpathy, who was the co-founder of OpenAI, and the AI lead at Tesla, and he's done a whole bunch of other things. But he's one of the great minds in artificial intelligence. And he was talking about generating code using AI systems, and he called it fully giving into the vibe, forgetting that the code even exists.
Wow.
He was going...
I was just going to say, what was he smirking?
I'm going to say, yeah.
But he was fully given into the vibe. And I think that, I don't know if John's done it, but I think Jim's tried the Whisper stuff for typing into... Yeah, Andre was talking about using the Whisper models from OpenAI to basically translate his speech into text, format it appropriately, feed it into the AI system. So he never actually even had to touch the keyboard. He just sat there and talked and said, okay, now run this, now do this, now do that. And it was just this idea of, as I think about these things, I add more things. I say, change that button over there, the submit button, make it so that it's a light blue with black text and stuff like this. And then the AI would continue to generate the code. And this actually goes back to a little discovery that was made. Like, it's hard to believe that it's only been a couple of years now, 2-3 years since ChatGPT came out. But they discovered that not only was it really good at language, but having swallowed up all of these programming languages in the creation of the model, it also understood the language of programming. They found out, apparently purely by accident, that the large language models could write code and write decent code. And of course, now we're 2 years in and we've reached, I'm not going to say that it's a pinnacle, but we've reached a level where we've gotten some incredible IDEs, integrated development environments, for the people out there who code for a living. As opposed to having to write every single line, you take advantage of the fact that some things are repeated over and over again. So the system recognizes when you say print in whatever program, whatever programming language, it knows that the next thing that you're going to do is maybe an open bracket or a double quote, depending on the programming language. And it opens all that up for you so that you can just fill in the thing that it's going to print by hitting a tab key or something like that. So that kind of automation has been coming for quite a while in coding. And we've been trying to walk down this road for decades. We all talk about being old guys in IT here. But I remember when fourth GLs came out and that was going to revolutionize the world. But I will go out on a limb and say, and I know that we're going to walk across a big minefield here, but I will go out on a limb and say that we've reached a point where some of what comes out is really quite good. I'm not going to say it's perfect. I don't even want to say that it's great, but it's really quite good. And it's at a level where it will outperform a junior programmer who's been within your company for only a couple of 3 months or whatever. And that's just by sitting down with a tool and telling it what you want in natural language. If I go into pick your favorite LLM, I mean, let's pick on DeepSeek for a second, because I know that I mentioned this a month and a half ago or whatever, when DeepSeek first came out. I told it to create an HTML/JavaScript page that was a mortgage and loan calculator. And it did. And all I did was just say, I want you to build this for me. I want the page to look like this. And it did all of the code and then gave me a button that I could click to run it. And I had a fully formed, fully functional web app sitting in front of me that I could use by just saying a few words and having it create something for me.
Yeah.
So exciting times.
I'll make the point though, and it's easy to get into this and either start with two attitudes. One is, this is never going to work. This is snake oil. It's never going to work, which only makes the true believers push at you harder. The second thing though, is to say we can't learn from the past, because as we were prepping for this show, I went over every major disaster that I had been responsible for over my career. And it's so funny. I'm sure I've told this story before, but I remember talking to a client saying, I've learned from my mistakes. But the idea is that if we're honest with ourselves, we've all made a lot of mistakes or been on programs or projects that have failed. And we have these meetings at the end of them. We call them lessons learned. And I wanted to call them lessons because we never seem to learn. And a lot of the things that we've learned from working with these various things over the years can help us be more successful and in understanding and using the capacity of AI, and whether we call it vibe programming, because I think that's so cool. It's like trucking, and I'll go back to rock and roll. It's the Grateful Dead, trucking. We can do that sort of thing. But so let's just orient it for the audience, for our friends out there who are having coffee with us on this. Just paint a picture for this of what you did. Just talk us through the first program or the first project you worked on with this, or the last one. We don't care, but.
All right. The very first time that I tried this, I did the basics that almost everybody does who gets into this and thinks that this would be a lot of fun, whether it's ChatGPT or whether you open up Claude and then you, in the window, say, create a snake game for me in Python. And it actually creates a graphical game, and you tell it, I want you to use the WASD keys to left and right, up and down, and so forth on my keyboard. So I want the standard controls for a game. It'll default to that because it knows that's what gamers typically use for movement on a keyboard when they're doing PC type games. Lo and behold, one pass and you've got a game that actually works, where the snake gets bigger as it eats the blocks on the screen. I'd like to see 3 lives up in the top left-hand corner. And it's got a life counter every time that you die when you hit a wall or something like that. Or you can say, I don't want to hit a wall. I want to be able to go off to the side. And so all these little modifications could do on the fly. And that was like the first thing that I did with this. And it was exciting because I talked, granted, it's an old game that I played before, but I talked a game into existence and I had it modify the game for me as it went along.
And at the same time as you're probably doing that, I was working on a website that I one day will come to life but long story on that one. But they wanted to have games that they could play that would intrigue somebody who had visited the website. And I was struggling with this programmer who was saying, it's going to take me weeks and weeks to write this game. And I went, I don't get it, man. And I went on to Claude and I said, help, I got to figure out how to write this game. Not only would it write the game, a relatively simplistic one, but one that could amuse somebody at a website. And not only would write the game, it would run it for me in a parallel environment. So I didn't even have to set up an environment to test this thing out. It did all of that. So you have this capacity, and this is a lot better than sitting up all night trying to figure out which bug you put in this code so that you can make hello world appear on your screen. That's really what many programmers will call a hello world experience, which is you get a new language or something you're going to do. And what do you want to do? You want to get it to make something happen on the screen. So for some of us sitting there, we'll wake up at 6:30 in the morning, seeing hello world, and then realize we have to go to work because we've been working all night on this thing. It's a weird experience, but that part of it's really easy. You can get to that result in a much more credible format. Like you're getting a game that actually works or a program that actually works or something that you can. So what was your next step in this?
Okay, so I'm just going to go back a little tiny bit to try to explain what I felt about the next step. I learned to code a long time ago. And yes, John, I learned to code in assembly. And
yeah, me too.
The first programming language that I actually used was Fortran. The second one I used was assembly. And then at some point I started working in BASIC. So we're going back a ways here. Fortran, I was in high school and I changed to the school that had the computer for the entire county, like as in the computer. And I went to that school because I wanted to be able to learn programming. So that was really cool. And I had that experience that a lot of people do when they first start programming. Like you say, you see print hello world and you run it and it goes, hello world. And it's, oh my God, this is so exciting. I told the computer to do something and it did it, which like might not seem all that exciting to people today, but it was really exciting at the time. So I started programming. I bought magazines where you would type out 300 lines of code into your TRS-80. And that's where I first programmed Eliza. And then I recreated Eliza so that she wasn't a therapist, but she was insulting and basically told you that the reason you've got all these problems is because you are the problem and stuff like this. So I was really excited by that. And then the years go on. And at some point, I came to this realization, okay, I can make the computer do anything if I spend enough time at it. And you know what? I'm bored now. I don't want to do this anymore. This is where I became a systems administrator. I worked on a tech support desk. I became an administrator. I became a network administrator. And because the internet was all the rage, your web pages and stuff like that, coding became this thing that I did if I absolutely positively had to, because it really wasn't all that interesting. This new development has reawakened that excitement of being able to make magic happen by telling a computer what to do.
In the history of programming, this was always the way. There were people who liked to write programs, and there were people who did maintenance. And maintenance programmers were inevitably looked down on. Sorry, guys, but they could save your life. They were wonderful, special people. I would go buy those guys pizza because they saved the code. But then there were the Jims who would write the program. I just create, I don't maintain. So think, but there's two mindsets we have to serve. The creativity to take us forward from people who, you're right, I don't want to, now today, as much as I spent as much time probably getting Hello World to appear on a screen now, damn it, I'll just do a PowerPoint slide, put Hello World on it, put it up there. And no, but it's just, I don't want to do that anymore. It's been 8 hours to go find out that I didn't put a semicolon or this little squiggly character that I can never remember the name of in there, and have my son or my daughter come by and go, "Did Jim?" They used to call me Jim. They call me Dad now, thank God. But they would say, what? It's just right there. So not only do you embarrass yourself now, but the younger programmers make fun of you.
By the way, my son calls me father. So,
That's
Wow.
all right. So one of the things that's happened recently are these complex IDEs. So one of the things you can do, if you go into ChatGPT, you can actually open up a coding window. It's called Canvas there. And in Claude, it's called Artifacts. And you can actually say, open this in Artifacts or open this in Canvas. And it will open up a window to the right of your screen where you will see the code. And when you say that you want to change things, you'll see the code being changed. And then you can run it from there, depending on the type of code that it happens to be. Obviously, it can't run anything that it can't run in its own internal environment. And if it requires something external, you're going to have to copy this stuff into an editor on your PC, whatever it happens to be, and then run it locally on your PC. Now, there are some tools, some integrated development environments, and there are a number of big ones. Copilot, I know, John, your company uses Copilot.
Yep.
Do they use GitHub Copilot for programming up there? Oh, interesting. Okay. So they just use Copilot as the AI internally. Yeah. Okay, got it. All right. So GitHub Copilot is one of them, but the big ones that programmers are really excited about are Cursor. Cursor is one of the big ones. There are a number of them, I'll be clear, but Cursor, Windsurf are the two big ones. Google just jumped into the game yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to play with it, but it's called Firebase, which is interesting because Firebase is also the name of an open source database system from a few years back. I don't know if it still exists, but it's called Firebase, and it promises to be an integrated development environment. And if you go along the bottom, looking at it now, we've got Go, Python, Flask, Java, .NET, Android Studio Cloud, Flutter, Angular, NextOS, Node Express, all of these different languages that it tells you you can specify up front, I'm going to work in this environment. This is the code that I'm starting from. Here's what my data files look like. And we're not even talking MCP yet at this point, right? We're just talking about, I'm going to create an environment. I'm going to drop in all of my data files. I'm going to drop in my templates, all of the things that I want to do. I'm going to specify the language I want it to work with. Off it goes. And then we've got a studio environment that starts to create these things. The one I played with Windsurf and I played with Cursor a lot. And Cursor is my current personal favorite at the moment. I did a lot of work with hospitals, helping them convert their systems so that they would be ready for Y2K, so that patient records would be available on January 1st, 2000. So it was a big deal. I got paid. I got 4 years of good work out of Y2K. So thank you very much to the coders who didn't think that we were going to need more than 2 fields for the date.
Yeah. If you can't be part of the solution, be part of the problem. Make work for other people.
That's right.
That's right. The reason I bring this up is that was a data conversion issue. And a client that I've had for a while runs an online store. They're a furniture store, and they've got an online presence. And they have been they've been doing this manually for a long time. It's like they go into a vendor's catalog, they find the things that they like, and then they upload it. But they're going like other stores have like thousands of products because somehow they magically build their store. But they've got all these disparate vendors, all with their own formats and so forth. And of course, I could go in, or they could hire somebody, or somebody could go in and spend a lot of time converting all of this data to a format that Shopify will accept, to the stores on Shopify. What I did instead was I brought up Cursor. The first one I did was actually with Claude. And it's great. You drop in your files, your Excel spreadsheets, where all the data is. You drop in you tell it to reference the Shopify default format. You tell it what you want it to look like, and it spins up an environment. And as both of you know, when you work with customers, if they like it and they use it, they will ask for changes. If they don't, they'll never call you again. Every day I'm getting requests for changes on this. Can we tweak this? Can we make this happen like that? First of all, they can't afford to pay me enough money to make all these changes on a regular basis. They just can't. Second, though, I can just go into Cursor and I can say, modify the output so that this is like this and so forth. And then suddenly I have my graphical conversion, which I've been working on for a few weeks now, which takes all of these new changes into consideration. And if there's an issue, which does happen, John's looking skeptically over at me. If there's an issue, I don't have to go and debug it. And I know this is scary, but all I do is I paste the error code from running it. Into Cursor, and I say, this is the error I'm getting. And Cursor goes, oh yes, I see. It's referencing this and so forth. I'll fix that for you. Just hold on for a second.
I was going to say that's really good to hear because, like Jim, I remember the good old days with case tools. I used to work with Sign-On for developing code on the AS400. And if there was a problem, God help you to try and figure out what it was. And so the idea that Cursor has the ability to take an error code and debug itself is very promising, because otherwise having a programmer have to go in to look at the code that's created could be a nightmare.
So let's go back, learning from the past. I was working at Cisco one time as a consultant for Cisco in Silicon Valley. I come from DMR. We learned architecture. There were ways to construct programs. There were ways to construct an architecture and understand the architecture of the business, understand the processes. We had this stuff drummed into us, and it made us much better. As a matter of fact, I don't think we were ever the best programming group in the world, but if you wanted it to work, you called us. And that was our thing. We thought through, we planned through, and we did it. So I'm sitting there talking to the CIO of Cisco at the time, and I'm saying, you guys have no architecture here. Like, how do you keep track of all this stuff? I said, and he said, Jim, this takes a week to write this. If it's not right, we'll throw it out and write it again. And there's two ways you can walk out of the room. You can say, wait a minute, is that a really smart thing to do? But on the other hand, he's probably right. We would have spent like 4 weeks understanding everything, architecting it. He took one guy, punched a bunch of HTML code together, and it worked. Now, there are limits to where you should use that. But I think my point is, before we start overreacting to this and saying, oh, this is terrible, we can't use this, we got to look for the places where it really functions. And that was the first time, because if you've ever done a data conversion, you know what Marcel's talking about, right?
Yep.
It's just painful work, and it's not meticulous programming. But if you're going to try and do this in Excel or a programming language, you got to come up with all these different rules to say, okay, I've got Marcel P, Gagné, I've got period there. To construct this using rules would take you hours of painstaking work to do very little, taking the period out of everybody or the understanding a middle initial. And you can spend days and days working this. But the problem with data conversions, you don't tend to do them a million times.
It's a one-off, right? You do the data conversion and then you're done. It's not a program that is mission critical. No one is going to die as a result of it, because they're not going to be trying to use it 10 years into the future. They're going to be using it to move this from there to here, and then we forget about it. And your guy at Cisco nailed it in that respect. One of the programs that I did, and this was like a couple of weeks ago, it just wasn't working. And it's not like I'd spent a humongous amount of time, but it had dug itself into a hole that it couldn't dig itself out of. Okay.
Sound familiar, John?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I told it to analyze the things I had asked for before. Seriously, look at the things I've asked you before and give me a summary of how this thing was created. And then I closed that session. So I had a screenshot of what the app looked like. Okay. I had my data files. I told it to summarize everything we'd done up to that point. I closed it. I opened the new project. I gave it its own instructions for rebuilding this thing, and it did it in one shot perfectly. That's magic.
Interesting.
Okay. I don't think both John and I have had the endless loop of death on this stuff. And I think both of us are now saying, where were you, Gagné, when we needed you?
But your Cisco guy nailed it. Basically, it's like I could spend another day trying to figure out what's going on here, have it look at its code, correct it, blah, blah, blah. But I could recognize that there was a hole being dug there. So I could recognize that. And I just dumped it and started from scratch and saved a day and a half or whatever.
You said that you took the instructions you had given it in the first place and gave it to a new window within Cursor, and it got
Correct.
it right.
Correct.
It goes back to the old adage about the sign of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So if you've asked it the same thing twice, you expect a different result the second time. Now, I'm being somewhat facetious, but I guess the question is that because of the fact that Cursor recognizes, ooh, I made a mistake, I need to correct it in the second one?
Nope. Nope. No, the reason that it works is because every time you open up a new chat in ChatGPT or any of these coding engines, by the way, Cursor uses Claude 3.7 as by default, it's using Claude 3.7. It's been upgraded to 3.7. It was using 3.5, blah, 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 blah. But you can tell it to use whatever.
Anybody out there who's listening, because we've had listeners from the car going, 3.7 is, this is good coding, right? I think that's.
Yeah, this is the latest and greatest, baby.
Yeah. So,
Anyway, because when you generate something new in generative AI, and by the way, this works with image generators. If you're using 4.0, the new 4.0 image generation stuff, like we've all played with it and we all think it's amazingly cool and so on. If you say modify this image, eventually like it's just not really working anymore. So what you do is you take the last good picture that you had, okay, that you want to work from. You take that, you close the current session, you open a brand new chat, paste the image and say, modify that. And it forgets because you've told it to forget everything that happened before that, other than obviously stored personal instructions. You can do the same thing in a programming environment. So you're saying, okay, just forget all of that and start from scratch. So it's not recognizing that it has errors. It's just regenerating from the beginning. And that's actually one of those things that people who work with this stuff on a regular basis, and I'll include it, I'm not the greatest at this by any stretch of the imagination, but if you work with this on a regular basis, you recognize that sometimes you cut your losses, you open up a new window and you start from scratch. And that starting from scratch, okay, creates a whole new context window for one thing. So there's a smaller context for the AI to work with. And that smaller context means it's easier for it to cycle through all of the things that have happened before to give you a new answer.
I have done the same thing, but with just the traditional AI assistant in ChatGPT that you ask it something and then you go in and modify it and you say, now change it to this. And you get to a point where this doesn't even look like what I had asked for originally. And so what I've done is I go back a couple of prompts and I'll copy that prompt. I'll close the window, open a new window and stick that new prompt in and start from there. So it's really the same idea.
And I didn't think this through. I just didn't want to talk to the stupid thing anymore. So I went up and got a glass of wine and came back and went, okay, I'll start again. So I was actually acting intelligently by going and getting a glass of wine and then coming back and starting.
Going off and getting a glass of wine is always an intelligent solution.
Yep.
And by the way, alcohol, for the people who say alcohol is not a solution, alcohol is a solution, chemically speaking. I just want to say that.
Yep. Absolutely. No, we've gone through the Kenny Rogers thing, know when to hold them, know when to fold them. And we've learned that the program, I'm going to do programming by Kenny Rogers. This is going to be good. But so you've now got you've got a reasonable construct in there. So what's the level that you've taken this to? Data conversion, any other stuff you're using it for, Marcel?
Yeah, there's a post. I should actually try to find it. We should include it in the show notes because it's really cool. You know who John Carmack is?
Yeah.
John Carmack, legendary programmer. He's the guy who created Doom, the famous video game.
Smarter than me by a million.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, somebody just a few days ago had a program, wrote an AI agent that auto-generated Doom, like a Doom maze and so forth. And the whole thing was being generated on the fly by an AI model. Okay.
Wow.
So Doom like this, and this is brilliant because John Carmack, again, he's freaking God for anybody out there who doesn't understand this. In the world of video game coding, the man, he is thought of practically on that level.
He wrote this incredible game, and you can still see it. It's really worth looking at this Doom, this incredible game. And I forget what level, we were still on 386 SXPs. I can't remember. We were on pitiful little things compared with processing now. And suddenly there's this incredible game.
Yeah, I remember playing Doom back in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. And we used to play it at work after hours. And it was great because you could play it over the network. And we'd have half a dozen of us sitting there on the network playing this incredible game with phenomenal graphics. Like it was just light
Well,
years
for its
ahead.
time, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. But you know what? The first game that I ever played of his was a game called Commander Keen. And I still love this game. It's one of those things from my childhood. Okay, I wasn't a child at the time, but nevertheless, I played Commander Keen.
Childlike.
And I
How's that?
loved the child.
My wife made her only financial joke, and that was, what's the difference between Jim and bonds? And that's bonds eventually mature.
Mature.
No. Oh, by the way, for the record, I still play video games every single day. I am a gamer and I'm perfectly happy to admit it. But anyway, so Commander Keen is him, Wolfenstein 3D,
Yep, I
okay, which
remember
was
that
a
one.
Doom-like game. And of course, and Quake,
Oh, yeah.
okay? Quake.
But these games were all monolithic and monumental accomplishments for the time.
By hand, coded by hand. And what Carmack and people like him did is they also spent years trying to figure out, how do I get the computer to do some of these things so that I don't have to code them all by hand? So at the beginning, he's coding games in assembly, right? Where you're individually referencing pixels and so forth. And at some point it's okay, so now we build game engines, and the game engines handle things like background motion and zooming and loading the next frame so that it looks like you've got a continuous motion across the screen. And these were all like massive, incredible innovations at the time. But you could think of them as early versions of AI coding engines, because what they did was they took some of the harder work that wasn't the creativity aspect of designing a game. They took it away from the programmer and said, don't worry about little things like physics, whether this object is going to fall when it goes off a cliff. I'll take care of that for you. And this is good.
Back to my history lesson here is my daughter, who's a fantastic game writer, learned when she was a kid how to move a pixel around a screen. It's a lot of work. There's an amazing amount of pixels. There's math that you have to learn and all of those sorts of things you have to do that. I think that was an incredible discipline. We can talk about where learning the foundations of how something works maybe is still a good idea. I'm not with Jensen Huang saying don't teach anybody to code anymore, but she would be doing all of those things. And then I started to think about this, and you say you can dismiss this. In the old days, when of the Renaissance and the painters who did massive murals and things like that, we like to think of them as the painter that did all of these things. But in reality, you know what they had? An army of guys who painted the background. They'd done trees. They did the mountains. I'll take care of God and Adam. You take care of the trees in the background. And I think before we diss this stuff, there's something to this. And again, I'm still mystified by it, but and the reason why we spend all this time talking about Doom, for anybody, I think it will conjure up images for people who've been around long enough to appreciate those things. You can type in a Doom program, and we're now able to recreate something that took a decade or more of trial and error to get to, and we're able to do it by typing a few commands into a machine. There's a lot to that. If you ever have to do a proof of concept, now, you're just away to the races. This thing that I was working on for this it's a friend who wants to do something. It's one of those projects where you end up doing it for a friend. Proof of concept. I can't do it yet, but in 3 months, what we've taken 8 weeks to do with a website, in another 3 months, I'll be able to just say, do this all and get the proof of concept. I don't care if it's ironclad or if it's got security on it yet or anything. I care that I can show that this idea works. And so now, even with the great tools we have now, because we're using a whole pile of reworked stuff, I would be able to take this and get done in an afternoon what it's taken us weeks and weeks of work to do.
No, I was just going to say that after you had talked to us about Firebase yesterday, I went in and was looking at it. Although I didn't have luck with it. It sat there and spun all night, but it is day one or whatever. But the concept of that is phenomenal, that it's the same idea as you have a prompt. You provide it with a prompt of what you want it to prototype for you. And so that's that whole idea, Jim, with the proof of concept. that you could potentially give it a single prompt and it'll spit out a proof of concept for you.
So a lot of these ideas are ideas that you build on top of. And of course, this is the classic on the shoulders of giants thing, which is why stealing code is not necessarily a bad thing, because that's not the final product. The final product is the idea that comes together. It's not, can I run and jump? Running and jumping, big deal. That's been done a gazillion times. But it's like, what happens in between? What's the story that drives this running and jumping? I want to finish up the Carmack thing, because what was interesting about it was he posted a tweet or whatever it was where he said, this is really cool. This is an amazing proof of concept. This AI that was auto generating on the fly, not generating the game, but generating the levels and the movement on the fly. So this wasn't coded, this was generated. And I have to stress how magical that is. So he talked about that. And then somebody came up and said, John, while I respect your work and all the work that you've done in the past as like man behind Commander Keen, Quake, and all these games and so forth, I have to say that I think it's a real shame that you're endorsing this form of programming, which is built on the back of stealing from people's ideas and stuff like that. And John replied in a very long post, arguing essentially what I've been arguing all this time. He said, I'll bite and let me answer why I think this is great. And he talked about this history of building from assembler and going through all these levels, and how none of this idea making things simpler steals or takes away from anybody. What it does is it makes it possible for you to bring an idea into the world without having to wait years, or maybe having that idea, frankly, after you're tired and you've lost a pile of money and you just can't do it anymore because there are a whole bunch of other things, and the idea dies on the vine. Now you have the opportunity to bring an idea that you've got in your head and have it transfer into the real world quickly and easily in a magical sort of way. And yes, there will be things where people create things just for me in the moment. I want to be able to jump into this environment, like the holodeck or something like this. I want to be able to jump into this environment and just explore something new and cool. And it doesn't actually matter that there's no story. It doesn't matter.
One of the things I'm going to do with this and personal productivity. I hate almost every personal productivity tool I have. And I'm hoping, I'm hoping that I was going to try and find some time to get away for a couple of days. And I just wanted to create that personal productivity tool that I wanted. It remembers everybody I know. It reads through my contact list, remembers everybody I know, remembers something about them. I can put all my notes together. And then I've discovered, they created that with Notebook LLM. But I can take a tool like that or create a tool that has got all those things that I want. And these are the things that I think used in an office. And I've used the Excel model before to say, this is a lot like Excel. You can create all kinds of stuff that'll make your day more productive. The question that we have to cross into, though, and I think it's worthwhile crossing into, is, can this ever be ready for prime time? Can you build corporate systems from it? Even small corporate systems, or God forbid, large ones. And before we all say no, because there are lots of problems.
Marcel won't say no, right?
No, Marcel won't say no, but John and I will say no, because we're going to end up dealing with either support from me or security from him. And that's where I think we have to watch how you go with this. And it goes back to the topic we had last week. If you want to understand how fast to move with these things, understand that people and processes and data move slower than technology.
Yep.
A couple of pieces in this. Prototyping a system, absolutely great. And I think there are some ways, by the way, to construct bigger systems with this. But if somebody walks into your office and starts talking to you about how they can build this system for you in 2 weeks and it's going to run your financial services company or something like that, run far, run fast. Know when to walk away, know when to run. We've now taken that. Remember the callback?
There you go.
It's called a callback in comedy. So I'm going to call back there. But don't get stuck into something without understanding this, because there's a pile of things that can go wrong. One is, and John, I'll leave this with you, how would you do a code walkthrough for security on a system that had been generated by an AI?
Ooh. Yeah, and I mean, that, from what I've seen, in most cases you can't. Or if you can, if I wrote a program and I had to go back to debug it, it's easier because I'm the one that wrote the code. But now you've taken Marcel's twitching. Now you're taking code that has been created not by someone else, but by something else, and you have to try and understand it. Now, one of the things that I think it was you I was talking to this morning, Jim, about whether or not there's documentation within the code, that tends to make it easier if each step of the program is documented. But if it's not, it can be a real nightmare because you can look at it and go, why the hell did they do this? And the one thing we were talking about this morning is, I think you said there was 85 ways of burying backdoors and things into code that you may or may not catch. And from my standpoint, this is one of the things, I absolutely love AI in general. The big issue that I have with it is it's gone way too fast. And the whole move fast and break things, I get it. But one of the things that I've seen that's being broken is security. Security isn't supposed to be an afterthought. It should be built as part of it. And my hope is that as AI in general matures, they will start to incorporate security in from the ground up. And I'm certainly hoping that from a coding standpoint, that becomes the case.
You have to distinguish between the LLM models, which are notoriously porous. Like I was dealing with one on the security show I do, cybersecurity today. I was dealing with one. How you convinced ChatGPT to break its rules and write this spam program? And answer is you ask it.
Of course.
So let's go back to this and start to think about some of the things that you have to do. For one thing, and Marcel, I don't know if you played around a lot with this, and I'm not the world's greatest programmer in the world, but I am the world's worst documenter. Absolutely. And the cool thing that I found about AI was you could put in some code and say, document this for me.
Yes.
And it will do all that stuff I hate to do. It will interpret all of these different things and document it. So there's some real power in being able to use these tools properly. And this is what I'm saying about, we have to move at the speed of people and sometimes and process. And so understanding how we're going to deal with security on this is great. But the other piece that's really there is you never attribute to maliciousness what stupidity can do. So that's as much as we worry about people building malicious things into code, I'm looking for something where I could go through. Can you find all of the places where this code could be insecure? And I think it's got a lot more patience than I do for that.
And I think that's actually one of the things that, you're going to need to do to address this, John, is be able to accept that the people who are doing some of this, like the bad guys who are doing pen testing and so forth, penetration testing, trying to break into systems or trying to find backdoors or trying to jailbreak or trying to do nefarious things of one form or another, they are using these AI systems to say, have a look at this. The idea that you're always going to bring it back to human oversight is great, but human oversight by itself is a formula for disaster.
Yes.
If you're going to use these powerful systems to create powerful tools, you're going to want to take advantage of the fact that they are also able to find ways to break things.
Yes.
And use that as part of your tool. Now, over in our Discord there, I just posted, while we were talking, I had it create an app for me. I told it to create a productivity app for Jim, like a ridiculously simple, but a productivity app, and run it inside. And it did the whole thing. And it works, but it even figured out that there was an error in its own code. And it had a button that said, fix this error, which I clicked. So if you take a look at it, maybe this is in Firebase. Yeah. So this is my first thing in Firebase. I think that these things are in a way magical. And I don't want to be all jumping into the boat 100% here. I recognize the weaknesses and I recognize the dangers as well. I'm not completely crazy that way, but we have to take into consideration that this is also our best way to deal with the monster that we're creating. Sometimes you bring in the best good guy to fight a bad guy is another bad guy.
And I was going to say that I think it gets to the point where you will have an arsenal of AI tools. And I don't know, let's say that you wrote something with Cursor, and you might have another AI tool that's going to go in and you're going to say, okay, go in and verify the code for me. Like, I'm not sure you'd want to do it. It's like you never have a programmer QA their own code. You get somebody else to do it. And so to me, that's the same thing, is write it with one AI and have another AI verify it.
Yep.
And
No, I think that perfectly viable. But what I'm getting at is, as we get into the enterprise level and you start to build bigger systems, we have to think of new ways we're going to handle them. The other thing that I was thinking about the other day was how easy it would be to construct a red team using an AI. Your idea of AI versus AI, and so that instead of trying to do walkthroughs of ponderous amounts of code, why don't we just attack it all? Throw everything we can at it. And I think that's a viable idea that you couldn't do before, perhaps with your system, or at least people never did, because if they did, they would have found a lot of stuff that was in there. So you can take that pernicious bang away at it type of thing that hackers will do, trying everything, and you can automate that. And I'm thinking that could actually be an improvement on enterprise code. The other piece. The third piece, though, I think that we have to think through is, and I think this is going to come up with MCP and for those model control protocol piece, is that we're now building the things that are going to help these move into the enterprise. And for those who don't know what MCP is, it's really, I'm starting to think of it as a bridge. And that is, it contains all the rules that you want to have that allow you to talk to data or talk to other systems. We used to write ponderous APIs. I think we're going to now expose those elements that we want to expose that can be accessed by an AI model. And that gives us actually better control in some aspects than others. In other words, I'm going to allow you to have these services and these things that you can contact and play with the program. In many cases, I think we may get to a better control environment than we are at right now, because those MCPs are going to be, I think they can be written well and they can be put together in ways that will help you really restrict. So picture a user that you want to come in and you want to give them all the ability to use AI to do all the reporting or all the stuff that you want to do. And so I'm going to put together an MCP that's going to say, you can get to all this data, not this data. You can get to everything here. You can retrieve it. You can report on it and all that sort of stuff. Go wild, but you're not going to update it.
So the MCP stuff is interesting because, first of all, it was developed by Anthropic and wrapped into Claude at the very beginning. And essentially it's for the programmers out there who remember the days of object-oriented programming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I could never make work, but people were always trying to convince me.
That was another
Yes.
snake oil thing. But anyway, the idea was that you had all these little program snippets out there in the world, and they were all going to follow some kind of standard set of rules or whatever. And you could just pull in this little snippet. Now, to be fair, these things exist within programming languages. They're called libraries that you bring into it. So that stuff does actually exist. It's not quite at the level that people envisioned it way back when. MCPs are essentially, if you want to think about it, a collection of agents. They are like, for anybody who's used Zapier,
The Zap?
Zaps, whatever. Yeah. For anybody who's used that, what these are basically, and they have rapidly become the industry standard. They're little hooks that can plug into any database, that can bring in any other piece of AI code that you need to do something and so forth. And if you want to create something in Cursor, for instance, or in Windsurf, or I'm sure in Firebase, although I haven't tested it yet, what you do is you say, pull in these MCPs to do these things for you so that you're not recreating all of these things all the time. And by the way, all of the major companies are going on board. This is actually probably one of the fastest accepted standards in the history of the history.
Isn't
Never
this like,
seen this before.
I guess I would classify this as like a universal API, right? That all of these systems and things will have APIs that you can either put or get data from these systems, but they all write their own. And I think anyways, that these MCPs is, here's a standard format, tell it what the fields are that are available and so forth.
I think they're better than that. Probably we're going to get mail on this one, both from the people who know this way better than we do and from the people who hate us because we attacked object-oriented programming. But I think the beauty of the MCP, if anybody's ever had to formulate or work with an API, like people say, oh, we give it a REST API. Give me a REST on that one. Give me we'll give you an API. They're never documented well enough. There's always some little thing that you're working on for ages to try and get, which should be a simple call. And I'll give you an example. We did this we set up a client and we're trying this out, and we put together a chatbot. And that chatbot could use RAG, it could read all kinds of things, and RAG, retrieval augmented generation. It was just a good way of accurately being able to read almost any type of document, bring it into the AI. Really great piece. So we put together a chatbot, and then we put together all of this stuff that said, we're going to actually, when the people chat with us, they should be able to set up an appointment with one of the salespeople. There's an API for that. And we got the API documentation. I won't name the company, but basically it just didn't work. And all we got back from support from these guys was, it should work. So we got stuck in an embarrassing situation with a client, believing the documentation that these people had. And when they got to it, as happens in the modern world, and watch out for this, these little companies with all these new little things or whatever can just walk away from you. So APIs, I'm happier to start to see things where the companies that provide the software themselves, like a CRM or a banking system or whatever, provide their own MCP, and we're relatively certain it's going to work. And that I think that I'm actually more comfortable with the concept of an MCP than I am with an API, believe it or not. Because sometimes the only thing you can say is she no work. That brought the meme down.
Wow.
Jeez. Yeah.
No, actually, no, I was just going to say that, yes, I actually think that calling it a universal API is a nice, simple way to look at it.
Yep.
And I'm happy to let it go that way. By the way, when we were talking about AI versus AI, I was thinking about Mad Magazine. Remember the cartoon Mad Magazine, Spy versus Spy?
Spy versus Spy.
Yeah, you had the black spy and the white spy.
Yes.
So anyway, so what I did was I told ChatGPT to create a comic strip, a comic strip in the style of Spy versus Spy, calling it AI versus AI. So I'll post that in the Discord server as well for anybody that wants to take a look at this.
Absolutely.
Here's the thing, John, just for you, like, people who do what you do, I think are going to be increasingly important in the sense that there has to be some adult in the room that takes a look at these things and decides what we should and shouldn't do. The idea that you can put this sort of stuff in the hands of anyone and have them generate or make anything that they like is both really exciting, but on one hand, it's also really terrifying.
Yep.
If I'm creating like a simple game, like one of the other things I did, Jim, you asked me, what else have you done? I made myself, you ever play these games where you're basically flying a bird or you're flying a plane or something like that and you're dodging?
Yep.
So on a lark, I was talking to my son about this a couple of weeks ago, and I said, oh, well, let's see if we could make a game like this on the fly over breakfast before you run off to school. And we did this in like about 4 or 5 passes. And of course, it worked perfectly the first time. And in the second time, it's, oh, but there should be trees that you dodge as you go through. Okay, so there are trees. There should be mountains. And if you hit a mountain, you crash into it. And this was entirely a browser-based game. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it worked. And it's fun. And I think increasingly we're going to have stuff like this all the time, where you are an individual at home. And again, this is not mission critical crap we're talking about here. This is not stuff where, I don't know, you can apply tariffs and take down the entire world financial systems on a tweet. Not that sort of stuff. I'm not talking at that level, but you can create something that you need at this moment for you specifically, that scratches a particular itch, that does something that you need to have done. These sorts of models, these sorts of development environments, which are increasingly being wrapped up into the models themselves, as opposed to requiring stuff like Firebase, stuff like Cursor, is going to be for programmers working at companies who are actually trying to do development work. But increasingly, you're going to be able to just call something into being to do something for you in the moment. And that could be a game, but it could also be helping you with your finances or whatever.
So, couple of pieces of wisdom as we wrap up for our day in this, though, is that these things always start at the personal level or at the small level, and they work their way into the enterprise. So people who think this isn't going to work its way into the enterprise, you're fooling yourself. It will. First of all, it'll come in either with one of your programmers or in some software that you already have. These companies are out there. Don't think Facebook and Meta and all those people are not working with AI right now to generate their code. That ship sailed. So we're going to be dealing with this. So the question is going to be, and I don't want to treat people in security like they're the adult in the room. I treat you more like that friend that my mother would want me to go out with if we were going to go drinking. The one who's going to say, we've had enough, let's take a cab. So that
responsible individuals.
Your CISO, that responsible individual. They don't have to be old or anything. They can be just responsible. But we need to deal with that. We're going to need to deal with testing. And we're going to have to understand how to test. And that just because this stuff arrives in a package does not mean that you don't have to test it. And we have to learn to use AI, not just for coding, but for security and for testing.
Yeah,
so those are going to be important skills. Don't dismiss those. Like the way we made that joke about the people who write the programs, people who maintain them, that you need people who are going to be able to do security, testing, and maintenance.
Yes.
And so if you're using these to make systems, start small. Start playing with this stuff now. Don't wait for it to arrive on your doorstep.
And don't rely on the humans entirely. You introduced me at the beginning, Jim, as a sysadmin. Okay. And one of the things that sysadmins do is we pore over logs to try to figure out who did what and what's happening and stuff like that. And humans, John, you can't take in all this data. It's just impossible to take in all this data. So what you did was you wrote scripts to highlight only those things that were important to you.
Yep.
So yes, Jim, it's not coming, it's here. And if you ignore it at your peril.
Yeah, and we've talked about this. We were 2.5 years into the real exposure to generative AI. We talk about AI years. In 3.5 months, what you're going to be able to do is going to astonish you. And that, when you start to see the big tools getting played out and some of the constructs coming in that allow you to create bigger systems and more complex systems with this, then the only fear I have is the same fear I have with humans. And that is, once you get to a system, it does not mean the death of architecture. You need to plan how you use these things. And one of the lessons we learned with all kinds of things, we learned, don't build something big. It'll only break your heart. Try to find ways that you can build this in a construct that is manageable and understandable. We started this whole idea of taking big systems and taking them down to microservices so that they were independent, could operate, and could exchange data and processes with other things, but were units that were reasonably good. So you knew if you had cut and paste, it worked. This utility, it worked. And so we need to figure out whatever that parallel concept is for AI, because I could see somebody, and this is we talk about the guys who are talking about replacing the Social Security administration system and probably already have a lot more code written for it than we think. No testing to make sure that it can take the load. So it starts collapsing. Yeah. No idea of what processes they're working with. So what's going to kill them is the breaking of processes, and probably not a whit of user testing, or more importantly, user experience testing. These are the things that we're going to need to understand how to work with in the modern world. Now, as harking back to our program last week, you used to have 2 or 3 years to deal with this. Now you got 2 or 3 months.
But one of the things that you can do is don't just use AI to build the code. Use AI to test the code. Use AI, you talked about user experience, those types of things. Use AI for those as well. And use AI to try to break the code and to break the security. Use it for all of the different facets, not just to write the code.
Yeah, and if you're not using it for specs now, use it now. Start today. Why? Because this is what I mean about user experience testing. You can build a prototype. Instead of getting a document that somebody signs off, you can show them this and say, is this what you want? And they can try it out. That alone could cut development time down astonishingly. So look don't just look at the generated code. It's the fun part. And by all means, dive into it.
And it is fun.
But remember that we need to build in all these other sections of this, and there's lots of room to play. And
Can I give the final word to XKCD? Do you know what XKCD is? It's the greatest comic strip in the entire world. Come on. You guys are supposed to be geeks.
I failed Geek 101 again.
All right. So XKCD is fascinating. The guy he's a physicist or something like this. He's a super smart guy. And a lot of the cartoons are all incredibly geeky and sometimes ridiculously detailed, despite the fact that they're like stick figure cartoons and stuff like this. They're brilliant. Once you go down the XKCD road, you never go back. But he's got one it's called dependency. And that's xkcd.com/2347 for somebody who wants to take a look at it. And it says it all. And it wraps it up for you, Jim, as well. It's like there's this monolithic structure, all modern digital infrastructure. And then there's a little tiny pin that's holding everything up at the bottom. And it points to it and it says, a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. So that little piece of code, that little tiny thing could be what's holding up the internet.
Yes, it needs the visual. So please go and take a look at it on the Discord channel.
Yeah.
xkcd.com/2347. Go look at the Discord. I've pasted it there.
Yeah. And if you're doing this check us out on YouTube, and you can see the Discord link I posted on every week's show. Call John and say, what was the link to the Discord again? Because I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to ask Marcel that. Because he'll do that thing of, oh, you guys, you just don't get with the modern era. You know?
Do I do that?
Sorry, did I say that? Yeah. Okay. That's been our show. We've got John Pinard. Thank you very much, John.
My pleasure. Always fun.
Marcel Gagné. And we've got me, who knows both types of music, country and Western. Yeah. Live long and prosper, guys.
Live long and prosper.
And that's our show. You can find the show notes at technewsday.ca or .com. Both work. Look for the podcast page, and you'll find on there a link to our Discord channel where you can talk to us daily. You can see some of the things we talk about, and a lot of the pictures and things that you might miss in the audio version are also there. If you're on YouTube, it's right there in the comments. I'm your host, Jim Love. Thanks for listening.